Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. We're going to continue with the modifications to the 2245. If you haven't seen our part 1 video, please check it out. You can see where we swap out the sights. In this one we're going to do all of the lower modifications. And none of the upgrades I'm going to show you today are necessary for it to function. This gun has functioned right out of the box. But most of these upgrades are to get rid of some nuisances. There's a few kind of what I might consider pseudo safety features. Ruger's definitely big on having safety features that cover the laws of all of the states in the country, so their guns can be sold everywhere in one version. And some of these features I really don't believe actually add any safety, but they definitely create hassles with using it. So let me go through some of the things I'm going to put in. One of the things that I was going to install, but I'm going to hold off on at the moment, is this loaded chamber indicator filler. And what this does is it eliminates the loaded chamber indicator that's on the side of the gun. And that is right here. Now the reason behind that is the loaded chamber indicator itself really doesn't cause any problem, but the way that it functions is known to cause some feed issues with weaker ammo. And because I do intend to run this gun with a suppressor and subsonic ammo, I was concerned that we might have some feed issues. But I ran into a bit of a snag as it relates to this pin right here. And theoretically what you would do with this pin is just take a rare earth magnet, they're very strong magnets, put it over the pin and it'll catch the pin and pop it right out. But some of the guns are manufactured where the inner steel sleeve that represents the barrel and the outer sleeve don't line perfectly, and it kind of snags the pin. So when that happens, the only way to get it out is you can pound on it a little bit with a rubber mallet, and that didn't work. Or you can break the loaded chamber indicator off, it's just plastic, and that gives you access to the pin to, cut a little notch in it and drive it out. So I'm going to wait and make sure that I actually need to. If I don't have any function problems when I put the suppressor on it with the subsonic ammo, I'm going to leave that alone. Otherwise I'll do a follow-up video showing the pain and suffering I have to go through to install that. The next part that I'm going to install, and we'll put this piece down, is the auto bolt release. One of the characteristics of these guns, and similar to the 1022, is that when the bolt is locked back, you can't just pull back on it and let go, aka slingshot it, to put it back into battery. You actually have to hold the bolt release in a proper position at the same time that you do it, and that's kind of annoying. I'm used to Glocks and all the other guns that we use, you just pull back and let go. So this will eliminate that annoyance and allow me to just slingshot it. And I've got this little bushing, and it's going to be kind of hard to see it in the plastic. And what this does is it eliminates the magazine disconnect. Now the magazine disconnect is a real pain on this gun, because if you saw my video on cleaning this or you've done it yourself, you know that on these guns, the entire Mark series, not counting the Mark IV, pulling the trigger happens repeatedly throughout the process. So you're constantly finding yourself inserting the magazine just to pull the trigger to get the hammer in a particular state, and then having to take the magazine back out because generally you can't disassemble it or do any other work with the magazine in, so you're constantly putting a magazine in and out. So that magazine disconnect's got to go. Now one thing I will mention is be real careful if you're in one of the jurisdictions that mandate some of these features, California, Massachusetts, and a few of those. It may or may not be legal for you to make such changes. So before you do those types of changes, make sure that that's not going to present a problem for you where you're located. So one last thing I'm going to do, and this isn't really related to any kind of a function, but I found these stoner grips, and they're just really cool looking, and they go well with the blue, the anodized blue. So I'm going to put these on just because I like the look of them. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the factory grips. They work perfectly. And other than the fact that these are just cool looking, there would be no technical reason why you have to do this. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to set the parts aside. I'm going to do the sights because today that'll be the only thing I'm going to do with the upper. And then I'll set the upper aside. And of course I don't have to bother with show and clear since I've got just kind of a pile of parts here. It is definitely clear. So let's get started. Okay, so I've got the lower now, and we're going to go ahead and disassemble the lower, and theoretically if you're going to do one part or the other, you can just disassemble the half of the gun that is relevant to that part. I'm going to do both parts, and you probably will find that it's going to be easier to just take the whole, both halves apart, whichever one you're going to do, because parts interfere with each other and they want to fight with it. So the things that you want to look at are, there's two springs. There's a spring over here, and you're going to have a hard time seeing it on my gun because everything's black in there, even if I put the light in there. But there's a little spring in there that fits into a groove on the pin. And that spring retains the pin, so you need to push that spring out of the way to take the hammer pin out. And the same thing is true at the front. Actually, this one you can actually see. It's right in there. That little spring retains the trigger pin. So to take the two pins out, we need to move these springs out of the way for a second to get the spring out of the detent, and then push the appropriate pin out. And then this plunger right here has a spring under it. So when we remove this disconnector arm, that spring will want to pop out of the way. So what we're going to end up doing is pulling the center pieces out, and then we're going to replace this arm, which is the bolt release, and we're going to eliminate this little bent piece of metal, which is the magazine disconnect and its associated spring. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to start with I'll go ahead and start with the back pin. Get the hammer pin out. We're going to go this way with the hammer pin, and then we're going to go that way with the trigger pin. And that's really just because of two things. One, where that spring is, and at the back, we're not going to pull the hammer pin all the way out. We're going to use the hammer pin to hold the safety in place, because the safety will hold the sear in place, and that'll prevent it from flipping on us. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to put the gun on safe. And that will lock the safety in place and also lock the sear in place. The other thing is, to remove the hammer pin, we have to take the grips off. And all that's real easy to do. You just take a hex wrench and unscrew the two grip screws and set them aside. They're not very long, they just pop right out. And you notice it's not taking any amount of force really to break them loose. And then just pop the grips off and then set them aside. And in this particular case, because I'm going to put those stoner grips on, I won't be putting those back on the gun. And now you can see there's the pin right there. So I'll start with the back pin, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my fingernail up on the one side and then reach in there and pull that spring out of the way and use that to drive the pin out enough that I can then punch it out of the way. And it's going to be real difficult for me to do this, to see that spring as I'm in there and not obstruct your view. But that's basically what I'm going to do. I'm going to move that spring back, push on this enough to get it to stick out, and then pop it through just enough to get it free of the safety. There it goes. And I'm going to pull it just enough. I'm going to put my finger over the parts. And I'm looking at it as I pull it back to make sure that I clear up the hammer, and I can feel the hammer assembly pop loose. So all of these components are loose, but I've still captured the safety and I've captured the sear. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the front pin, except with the front pin, I'm going to push the pick in there and push down on the spring to clear it while I push on the pin and hopefully pop it free. And that pin comes out. I'm going to put my finger over these parts. Again, I don't want parts flying away on me. Now at this point I should be able to pull the trigger up, and I should also be able to remove the disconnector arm and the various parts. So now I've got the trigger, there's its little spring, I've got the piston that was in the trigger, this arm we are going to put back. This is the old hammer pin. That's going to be replaced by the new one, so I'm going to set that aside. And this is the magazine disconnect and its associated spring. and those are going to go bye-bye. I'll save them in case I ever have to put them back. So what I've got now is a fairly empty frame. That very shiny part there is the sear, and it's being held in position by the safety, which has still got part of the pin in it. And I can actually kind of push the pin back in a little bit to make sure that it doesn't just fall out, but the spring tension is going to hold it. I'll have to push that pin back out of the way before I resume. If you mess this up, if you drop the pin, you forget to do this, all that can happen is the sear can flip back this way. And if that happens, you just have to make sure you flip it back forward again before you put the gun together. You can actually get it to go back together with the sear in the wrong spot, but then of course it just won't work. The other thing you'll see now is that the bolt release is loose. And we should be able to wiggle this up and out. And it's got a little piston with a spring, and we will be setting that aside, and we'll be using the one that comes with the new part. So I'll set those two parts aside. The new part there's the new part, its associated spring and piston. And what we're going to start with is just the bolt release. We'll set the spring and piston aside for the moment. And we're going to put the bolt release back in just like the old one was. And you'll notice that as I'm doing this, the bolt part of it, the part that you can grab with your finger, is facing out towards the side of the gun, so it'll stick out. And notice there's a little hole in that bolt right there at the base of it, right there at the end of my finger. There's a hole right there. That's where the spring's going to go. So I'm going to drop this back into place, and it does take a little fumbling around with to get all the pieces and parts lined up to get it to go back together, because you have to get this end piece, there's a little flange, has to hook in that plastic hook. So you kind of have to wiggle it around to get it into place. I put it back into place, and then you'll see that the arm is now lined up roughly with the hole. And it's kind of real hard to get the light in there, but you'll see that the arm is roughly lined up with the hole. It's not important that it be perfectly lined up at this point. We'll line it up as we're getting ready to put it back together again. So now I can start to reassemble the various components. And I'm going to start with the hammer. And the hammer goes into the gun like this. So when I took it out, it fell out basically exactly the way it lays. The little new pin needs to go in on the right side of the gun. So I'm going to put it with the hammer upside down like this. I'm going to put it on the left side because it needs to take up the slack that was previously occupied by that magazine disconnect. Then I'm going to put this back on it, push the pin that I pushed out a little bit to make sure that I kept hold of the safety, push it flush so that I can slide the parts back in. And it can be rather difficult to do and show on camera, but you can see where it's going to go. You can see where the parts are going to go. And you can see that I'm doing this without the magazine disconnect piece. So I'm just going to get it in there and then show you what it looks like when it's done. I ran into a little bit of a snag. I'll show you this and show you how I ended up fixing it. But there was a little burr on this. And you'll see that the pin goes smoothly, but it bottoms out at the end. And that little burr, you can actually see it because I've already done part of the removal of the burr. You can see this barrel curled up right here. But what I ended up doing is putting it in an armorer's block, giving the pin a kind of a smack with the hammer, and I had it in there and gave it a whack with the hammer and popped this little burr out of the end of it. And I'm going to pull that out, and then I'm going to inspect it, and if there's any remaining burr there, I'll get a little file and file it down. I wasn't expecting to have to remove machining burrs from it, but I guess anything can happen in the manufacture of a component. But you want this pin to go through, and there's still burr in there, so it's kind of stuck now. I can push it through, but it's hanging up. You want it to operate smooth. So I'm going to get a little file, and I'm going to file that smooth around that end where that burr was, and then I'll put it all back together and show you what it looks like. So I've got the parts back in place, and a few of the things that you'll want to check when you've got it all put back together is to look over here and make sure that the spring, you can kind of see the top of it kind of reflecting a little bit, a little point of light. Make sure the spring is behind the pin and in the groove. The safety should operate freely. You should be able to move the safety up and down to the safe and fire position. The hammer should move very freely, so that you can move the hammer freely, and the disconnector arm should move freely. So if you got all those parts moving freely, then you've got the gun back assembled correctly. And while I was messing around with it, I let this fall back out. And that's no harm. If that happens, just put it back in there. And again, so I'll just kind of drop it in through the hole, line it up, and drop it into place. And of course, that won't fall out once I get the rest of the front of the gun together. The front of the gun is going to go together very similar. I'm going to set this down for a second. But it'll be important that you get this plunger and its associated spring back together and up under that disconnector arm when you put the trigger back in. And the same thing will apply. You want to make sure that the trigger moves freely once you've got it assembled. So the same thing applies. It's going to be almost impossible for me to do this showing you while I'm doing it. So I'm going to do it, and I'm going to show you the end result when I've got it all put back together. Okay, so I've got it all assembled, and you'll see that the bolt release moves freely, and we're going to fix that. It's not going to be quite so free when we're done with the last step of it. I have the plunger back in place with the spring under it. If I push down on it, there's tension. I have the disconnector arm back in place, and the spring, you can see it right by my fingernail there, is back in place, and it's captured the pin. And always remember, you can use a punch through the opposite side to line the parts up and then use that to guide the pin in. So I have all the pins in place, and we can partially function test it at this point. With it in this position, the hammer should move, and as I pull the trigger, it'll move the hammer a little bit. If I turn the gun upside down, nothing should happen. If I pull the trigger, turn the gun upside down, the hammer should fall forward. And note that this little arm needs to point towards the back of the gun. Now, right at the moment it's up, but when I fold the hammer back down into place after I pull the trigger, that'll need to be at the back of the gun. And if it hangs up on the frame, just lift it a little bit and turn the gun this way so that it's at the back. And the way you can tell if you got it right is if you look at the back, and shine a little bit of light in there. If you look at the back, you can see that little arm sticking out into the area where the mainspring housing is going to go. And it's important that that be to the back so that it can connect with the mainspring housing. If it gets caught in the mag well, then you won't be able to get the gun back together. The last step now is to install the spring and the little pin in here. So if we look at it, we'll see that the hole is on the top. If I get the light just right, you'll see the hole is on the top. In that hole, we're going to put a spring in, and we're basically going to put this little spring and piston assembly. I'm going to assemble it the way it'll look. I'm going to put this spring and piston assembly that's in my hand. We're going to put that in there with the spring down into that hole and the piston up against the top of the frame, and that's going to put a little tension on it. And that's going to be part of the auto bolt release, they call it. It'll allow us to slingshot it. By when there's a magazine not in place, it's going to want to go to the release position. There's not enough tension to cause it to release itself. You would have to pull back on the bolt release, so it's not going to just spring closed on its own. But there is enough tension when you pull back on the bolt release, it'll move out of the way. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to put the spring in kind of at an angle like that, line it up in the hole, and then it's kind of a three-handed operation using small picks or a screwdriver to keep the base of the spring in the hole as I compress it and put the piston in place. So I'm going to pause the camera, go ahead and do that because my hands are going to be all over the place. I just won't be able to do it where you'll be able to see it, and then I'll show you the end result. So there you can see it's installed, the spring is there and the piston's there and it's up against the frame. And what it does is it makes the bolt release spring down on its own. Now if there's any tension up against it, like from the bolt, it'll hold it in place. So it will keep the bolt held open. We're not going to lose the last round hold open or the ability to lock the bolt open when we want to, But as soon as you take the tension off, it's going to pop out of the way, and then when you let go, the bolt will spring forward. So at this point, we've kind of semi-function tested the various parts. The hammer's free, the trigger works, the bolt release springs. So we've got all of the parts in play. So now we're going to put the grips back on it and go from there. And the grips, of course, also help retain the pins and keep them in place. So installing the grips is relatively easy. It's really just the reverse of taking the grips off. So I'm going to take the new grips that I've got, those are the Stoner grips that I purchased. I got these on eBay, and they do seem to be really high quality grips, and they're really nice looking. And I just take the grips, lay them in place, take one of the screws, drop it in, and tighten the screw down just enough that it doesn't fall out. Drop the other screw in, and again tighten it so it doesn't fall out. Make sure the grip is centered, and then tighten it just tight. You don't need to tighten it up for life. You don't want to over tighten it. It's all plastic parts, it'll break. So I'm just using like a couple fingers and just putting a little tension on it. And I'll tighten up the other one, doing the same thing, just a little bit of tension. And that's enough to hold the grips in place. If they do happen to loosen up, then you can tighten them up a little bit more. But it's plastic. It's a plastic frame, and plastic does have a tendency to hold screws. They have less of a tendency to wiggle loose on their own. So you shouldn't have to use any sort of thread lock or any other component on them. Again, put it in just till it's tight. And tight. So now I have the new grips in place. These are a little bit grippier, and they've got a little more texture to them and a little more of a sandpaper feel. They're not quite as smooth as the older grips. Not that there was ever really an issue with controlling this gun before. It is a 22. But at this point I've got everything reassembled, and now I can reverse the process and just reassemble the gun like normal. If you've gotten good at doing one of these, then you know exactly what the steps are. If you haven't, we've got another video, and I'll put a link to it. These guns have a reputation of being miserable to reassemble, and I've got a process where I can do it in about 16 seconds, and it goes through step by step and shows you how to reassemble it. So if this is the first time you've had one of these apart, or if you're looking at this saying now begins a half hour of four-letter words trying to get it back together again, take a look at that video. The steps in that video will make it very, very easy, and you'll have the gun put back together. So I'm going to put this back together, save you the time of watching it. I'm going to put this back together, and then we're going to function test it. Got it all back together. You got the nice blue grips that really kind of stand out nicely with the blue upper on this particular gun. Got them on the other side. And as I mentioned earlier, they have these in different colors. Like if you had the red upper, they've got a red version of this that actually looks pretty nice. And if I've got the bolt locked back like I do at the moment, to release it, all I do is just pull back and let go. I don't have to mess around fighting with the bolt release to get it to release. And I have no magazine in it. Of course, it's empty. And I can fire the gun. So all of the excessive safety nuisances that are on here are now gone. Watch at the end of the video. You can see the range footage where we take it out and function test it. But if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, and have a great day. Thank you.